with, and we've got other cuts that we're looking at, and we're looking at every opportunity to cut. But when it's all said and done, the math just doesn't bear out. And if you don't think that those folks that are in the negotiating rooms as we speak, talking about deals, what are we going to do at the end of the year, what are we going to do in a lame duck session, and the kinds of things that take place that the media aren't privy to, the only way you're bringing both parties to the table is if the Democrats are coming to the table with revenues. So do you trust those people that are bargaining the deal? And when it all comes out and they don't have a permanent structural reform and all we settle for are short-term cuts, is that sufficient for you? That's not sufficient for me, because we've had that before. And here we are, fourth year in a row, $1 trillion and plus deficit, and we're $15.6 plus trillion in debt and rising. And folks can't realize that we absolutely have to have systemic reform, permanent structural reform in Washington to make these problems more manageable, and hopefully within another 10 or 20 years be able to look back and say we did something worthwhile by forcing Congress to spend within its means. That's an irresponsible approach. But that's not, listen, we absolutely recoiled in disgust when the Democrats forced Obamacare on us. They did it on a party line basis. So now as Republicans, as repugnant as it is to us to see party line politics like we saw with Obamacare, are we now going to do the same thing? And I think that we have to look at this and search our souls and say, I hate tax increases.
Hang on a second. We can't do the same thing because we don't have a majority in the Senate and the White House. Are you saying in the future?
That's semantics. I'm talking about in the future. I'm talking about what if the situation was reversed? Is it okay for us to force a policy on folks? If we're going to do a balanced budget amendment, it's going to require both sides to come to the table. But I'm willing to compromise on a short-term tax provision for a long-term permanent structural reform.
What would you say to the people that disagreed and said it would be okay because we would have elections 2 years from that point if they did force that on us, and people would have to go home and defend what they did, defend their ideas, defend their solutions? I mean, I that's how the system works. I mean, if we get the Senate and we get the White House, why not force through the cuts that we deem necessary to save the country?
Well, my fear is this, that, you look at the numbers. We've got, even the most conservative budget, even the Rand Paul budget last year, which was extremely austere, very deep cuts, almost unmanageable from the standpoint of running the government, was still 5 years to balance. The RSC budget was still 10 years to balance. The Paul Ryan budget, 20 years to balance. We have to realize how deep this hole is. And if we can't combine these cutting efforts and spending caps with a permanent measure to make sure that we don't repeat this, then we're going to see it all happen again. And that's the point I'm trying to make. We're getting way wrapped around the axle about a short-term targeted approach versus a long-term structural reform.
I understand that, and I think a balanced budget amendment is a great idea, and I think a majority of Arkansans would agree with you. I think a lot of people around the country agree with you. It's just this particular compromise. It just seems like it's adopting the progressive ideas from the left, and I know you don't agree. You don't agree with that. It's the millionaires who aren't doing their fair share. But it's in your piece.
I believe millionaires are doing more than their fair share.
Okay, but it's,
I believe millionaires are contributing in huge number to the tax base, and I do believe we need to broaden the tax base, and I do believe that we need to reform the tax code. That's why this is a short-term approach. And I've talked to several millionaires over the last 48 hours or so, and I've had millionaires say, "Listen, if we can get a balanced budget out of it, I'd be willing to go ahead." But I'm not willing to go ahead with this if we're not going to do something meaningful. And so I don't even want to address tax increases of any kind outside the context of us securing permanent structural reform, period. So the discussion doesn't even start until we pass a balanced budget amendment. That's when, first off, that's when the tax would kick in. After the balanced budget amendment is sent to the state, and it's short term from there on. So I am not an advocate for tax increases for the sake of tax increases. What I am an advocate of is a balanced budget amendment and bringing folks to the table in a way that we can actually affect that.
We've talked about sacrifice before, and you were just telling us that the math doesn't add up. Do you think this is because we have people that are they don't have the message yet? They don't have the message of World War II that we have to sacrifice if we're going to get out of this mess.
Absolutely.
And secure? Okay.
I think that we have, our what we always, lovingly and respectfully refer to as the greatest generation, that we're losing daily, and the lessons that we learn from that generation are starting to, slowly but surely sort of seep out of our consciousness as a country. And the fact is that as Republicans, yes, we're hard and fast on taxes. I understand that. Democrats are taxing spenders, and we know that. But the point of the matter is, we're all Americans here. And if we as Republicans can advance an agenda that says we recognize we have a spending problem in Washington, we recognize that the only way we can get our arms around it long-term and permanently is to make sure that we have those permanent structural reforms in place. At that point in time, for the good of the country, would you be willing to bite the bullet on a short-term targeted approach? Would you be willing to do that? And listen, I am not maligning a group of people who have achieved and done well for themselves, and that's the American dream. I hope to be so fortunate in my lifetime, and I hope you are too. And I hope everybody, that's what makes this country great. But what I'm hearing from these folks is that we're willing to do it, but we're not going to do it, and we're not willing and don't want to talk about it if you're not willing to do something permanent to protect us from future tax increases.
Can I ask
and if we don't do something along those lines in the very near future, we're going to see our taxes double or triple for everybody.
Let me ask you this, Congressman. Last question, because we got to go. But you've been in Washington now, almost 2 years, and you said something a minute ago that just kind of raised my eyebrow a little bit. Is it possible to cut our way out of this problem? I mean, is it possible to cut our way out of this problem and institute economic policies that will actually broaden the base, increase tax revenue by the American people and business owners creating jobs? Or do you see that we're going to have to raise revenue as well?
I don't want to think that we have to raise revenues, but the numbers are just not on our side on that score. And what I'm afraid of is that the kind of cutting that it would require would mean that there would be absolutely nothing left to keep our promises to our seniors with respect to Medicare and Social Security, and we would not be in a position to adequately care for the folks who genuinely need our help. Now, I'm not talking, listen, we can have this debate on another day about where that help goes and how people are, taking advantage of the system and so on. And believe me, I get that, and I'm with you. But let's talk about the basic function of what our government is about and what those promises to our seniors are about. And if we were to cut everything and look at strictly cuts, and believe me, we would not be in any position to keep the promises to our seniors with respect to health care and Social Security, and we would see an economic calamity ensue. And I am trying to avert that kind of catastrophe. And listen, I need people to really give this some thought before we just, oh man, a tax increase, this guy's nuts. There's no way he's a Republican. That can't be the case. Listen, we have to start thinking in real terms If all you want to talk about is cut spending, I'm with you on cutting spending. But eventually you run out of stuff to cut. And we've still got debt. Now, where are we going with I mean, if we've cut everything out and we still have $15.6 trillion in debt, where do we go, Paul?
That's true. I mean, if that's what the numbers reveal, I mean, I personally still think, though, that we can get the economy going. We can get the American entrepreneurial spirit going. We can cut spending.
Do you know how we do that? And I agree with you 100% on that. We cut the spending, but we look at things like, the trillions of dollars in this economy that are right now treading water, that aren't being put into the economy because of regulatory burden.
We got 30 seconds.
Tax policies with respect to repatriation, businesses that are doing that own companies offshore. They don't bring their money back and invest in countries here in their company in the United States because they're heavily taxed by bringing their money back through repatriation taxes. Those are the kinds of things we need to look to get our corporations back on track and in hiring mode and growing the economy.
All right.
The reality is we need permanent structural reform.
Congressman Rick Crawford, I want to thank you for coming on the program. Thank you so much for listening to my concerns and educating the public. I appreciate it. Thanks, and I can't wait till you come on again soon.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
All right, folks, one more hour coming up next. My thoughts, your thoughts. Give me a phone call. Back in a minute.